accessible web fiction returning to Magic, there's hope for a return to form for Magic's story. But whilst new narratives are exciting, it's worth remembering that there is a vast back catalogue of story articles to pore over. So today, we kick off our MTG book club with the 2015 Alison Luhrs story, Family Values, and join Teysa Karlov on a journey of intrigue and revolution. Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things Magic flavour design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And today we're going to be doing our first book club episode. So we wanted to try something slightly new. We had fun basically not focusing on products, which I think has been our kind of bugbear for the past few weeks, is trying not to focus just on Magic news in general. And we thought it was a cool idea to do essentially a book club where we look at individual web stories, some of the web fiction, no rules. So it doesn't matter if it's a self-contained story or in the middle of an arc or if it's new or old or whatever. If it's accessible web fiction stories, we wanted to just focus in, talk about the story individually and obviously any kind of context in and around it. And just kind of celebrate the massive backlog of accessible fiction that there is in Magic, especially since we've returned to it in the past couple of sets. So I'm kind of excited. What did you think when I kind of suggested this idea to you, Nathan? Were you up for it?
Yeah, I think it's key. I think there's a lot of blocks. I forget again timey-wimey stuff. Like I've been playing for a long time, so I forget the stuff that only happened like say 3 or 4 years ago is still stuff that's slightly outside people's awareness. If you've only been playing like a couple of years, like 2 years of playing Magic, you can feel like an entrenched player.
Yeah.
But you'd have missed out on like some really really cool arcs as they came out at the time. Which a lot of people, that's how they picked up on the stories. They don't necessarily go back and reread everything, even if it is available. They usually read it as it comes out, right? So there's some really cool arcs that I think we'll be able to look at going forwards with this that have a lot of depth and context for like the play and stuff like that. So it's a good little breeze by breakdown, a review as it were. It's also nice to see some of these characters like on a macro scale. So yeah, I like the idea of it. I think you started with a good one.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, as we discussed ad nauseum last week, the Orzhov are my jam. Today we're going to be looking at Family Values, which is a 2015 story written by Alison Luhrs, which was part of a little kind of mini group of stories that were up on the web fiction that kind of fell just after the Dragon's Maze Gatecrash era of Ravnica. So we're post-Deca Millennial. Jace has just become the living Guildpact, and it's that kind of little pocket of Ravnican history. It's literally just weeks after the Dragon Maze event and the kind of drawing up of the new living Guildpact. Obviously, we know everything that happened after that time in Ravnica, and this will be a fully spoiled episode, so we're not going to be kind of hiding any plot points or spoilers or anything. I mean, certainly not from like 2015.
No.
What we're going to do is we are going to post up the link to the story article in our description. So if you haven't read it already and you want to kind of read it with us, or if you want to read it first and then come back to it, we'll have the link there, because these story articles, they are still on the WotC mothership, like officially, but the links to get to them are a bit tricky, so you kind of have to know how to like Google search and do all this kind of thing. We're also going to put in a link to the previous quote-unquote story, Teysa Karlov by Adam Lee, which was kind of like the pre-story to this one. Nathan, I know you've also done a couple of chapters of The Gathering Storm, which was the Django Wexler book, because they kind of, the Teysa story arc is followed very much during The Gathering Storm. Teysa Karlov is actually a surprisingly big character in Ravnica, and we'll kind of get onto that as well. But that's not necessarily required reading. And yeah, I will have to apologise. I've got quite a sore throat today, so if it sounds like I'm a little bit breathless, or if I'm turning to the side to cough, I've got a bit of a sore throat today. So Nathan, you'll have to do some of the heavy lifting, I think.
That's fine. I'll carry you, buddy.
Cool. All right then. So we're just going to get straight into it. As I said, the context for this story is it's just after the Living Guildpact has been announced. Jace is the Living Guildpact, and we know from the Adam Lee story that Teysa Karlov is planning to overthrow the Obzedat. She's already enlisted the help of Tajic, who was the Boros Champion, Teysa herself being the Orzhov Champion and Maze Runner, as they were called during the time of Gatecrash, because they were trying to run a thing called the Implicit Maze, the Implicit Maze, which ended up with Jace becoming the living Guildpact. We're not going to dive too much into Dragon's Maze and all that kind of stuff because that's literal books worth of storyline. But this is the kind of area that we are. If you haven't read the story and you just want a little overview, or if you have read the story and you just want a little reminder, I will give you a very quick overview now. So, family values. We open up with Teysa Karlov sitting in her chambers, revising a law book that she herself has written, along with a big stack of other books as well. Several weeks before this event, she met with Jace and had him hastily ratify a string of minor laws. Teysa herself is an advocist, which is essentially a magical lawyer, as well as being the grand envoy of the Obzedat, which was a title bestowed to her by the Orzhov leaders, the Obzedat themselves. Karlov of the Ghost Council interrupts her research and makes efforts to belittle her, and we see a little kind of back and forth of them kind of ribbing each other and belittling each other as they go. They're obviously part of the same family, with Karlov being her grandfather, although it's more likely to be her great-great-great-great, like, infinite grandfather. We're reminded of Teysa's plan to usurp the Obzedat. So we see Teysa kind of thinking to herself how sweet it will be when she finally gets rid of these old dead men who are running the guild. Teysa and Tajic finally meet up. So Tajic is taking Teysa, who is in disguise, to a local Boros jail in the Orzhov district. We don't quite know why. But we know that Tajic is treating her like an old crone, is the terminology that he uses for her, and is dragging her through the streets. Turns out that Tajic has been building a secret tunnel from the Boros jail through directly to the Obzedat's personal chambers, which are found deep beneath the Church of Dills in the Orzhov Basilica. So he's been trying to find a secret, non-public way into the Obzedat's internal chambers, and we see that this Boros jail is the opening for that. Teysa goes on to use her law magic to enter and seal the tunnel, and we find out that the minor laws that she had Jace agree to a few weeks earlier, which seemed to be kind of a throwaway thing which she used to annoy him, were actually very specific laws. So that would give Teysa specific powers to allow her to kind of get past the checks and balances that she thinks the Obzedat have put in place to stop people getting into their inner sanctum. So we start getting an idea that on Ravnica, law magic isn't just like on pen and paper. It's when something is ratified, especially by the Living Guildpact, who is the ultimate law on Ravnica, these laws become like metaphysically enforced. So all these little minor laws, basically loopholes that Teysa is going to use to get into the Obzedat's lower sanctum. Teysa and Tajic head through into the council's burial tombs and eventually to the records room, where Teysa uncovers records and a book which shows how the Orzhov have been embezzling and changing their own coffers and their own money records to kind of work the system. And she attempts to use this evidence with Tajic, who is a Boros legionnaire, acting as a witness, to basically grass up the Obzedat and magically bind them by law. Her attempt fails, and we discover that the Obzedat's chambers are somehow, and no one knows quite how, beyond the reach of Ravnican law magic. So they discover that the laws that they try to break inside the tomb, they're able to break without any hindrance. So I think it's Tajic tries to steal a knife off of Teysa's hip, and he's able to do it without anything stopping him, any kind of magical barriers. So they discover that the Obzedat are basically beyond the law. Karlov and the rest of the Ghost Council basically rush in on them in the chambers and catch Teysa and Tajic in the act of trying to frame them. And he and the rest of the council imprison Tajic and strip Teysa of her role as an advocate, which is something that they shouldn't be able to do. It's only the Azorius who are able to give that sort of title and take it away from people. And they also order her to meet them at a later date to talk about her role as Grand Envoy, which we know in previous stories is something they also took away from her in the short term. Teysa realizes that her position in the Orzhov was always used more to bind her to the ruling families than to give her any sort of real power. And that is where we leave the story, with Karlov and the rest of the Ghost Council seemingly winning over Teysa's attempted coup. So yeah, it's kind of a very short, self-contained story, but there's a lot going on in there. And also there's a lot of stuff that kind of sends ripples throughout. Like, the story doesn't stop at the end of this story, right?
No, it continues. So this is kind of how we start introducing Kaya into the equation, like in the aftermath of her getting locked in a tower, as it were, like a Disney princess. So it does her. I mean, Teysa is really important, right? Teysa's done a lot of things throughout the history of Ravnica. So she did a lot of things back in the day, like she helped with the Ivara Reclamation Zone, which had like a little Orzhov pocket in it, and basically was able to stop crazy Izzet mage who had gone fire mad from raising eldritch dragons to raise the entirety of Ravnica. She's had some like cool shit in the past I had no idea about properly anyway, because I didn't read the story back in original Ravnica, which has some deep lore of
she's
it in
the
of itself.
Baroness. Yeah, she's the Baroness of the Utvara region for the Orzhov.
Yeah.
So she has political power. She has personal sort of like positions, like throughout this story and throughout a lot of Teysa's stories, she talks about how her role as an advocate and like a magical lawyer and a law mage is something that she herself has achieved, and it's nothing to do with the fact that she's part of the Karlov bloodline. It's nothing really to do with the fact that she's an Orzhov. You know, this is something that she's taken for herself, and it's something that she sees as being her weapon to protect herself even within her own guild, is the fact that she's able to find loopholes and kind of use law magic. I think, again, we said this in the last episode with Kristen Gregory talking about our favorite guilds, is that the Azorius use laws to control and to bring what they think is order and sort of systematic balances to the kind of governance of Ravnica, whereas the Orzhov and other advocates and other guilds use law magic instead to find loopholes and to gain advantage and to make sure that their ends are met, if you like, whether they're nefarious or not. So this is how Teysa uses those kind of things. And then she also has this role as the kind of voice of the Obzedat, the living voice of the Obzedat, because the Obzedat are all ghosts. So she's the grand envoy of the Orzhov. So she's an incredibly powerful and kind of linchpin character in the kind of guild system. She is also the person who was the primary ratifier of the new Guildpact. So rather than the magical Guildpact, which fell apart, the whole Decamillennial instance happened with the maze and all this kind of thing. And then she was the one who wrote up and drew up the living Guildpact kind of laws and bylaws and things with the help of the Orzhov. So yeah, she's a big deal, right?
And also because of it's all of these actions that kind of lead Tajic to want to work with her. And I'm just going to preface this, because reading the Teysa Karlov story in isolation as well has a bit of an exchange between her and Tajic. And am I the only one shipping Tajic and Teysa right now? Did you get any vibes?
No, I did. Yeah,
there are vibes, right? They're definitely flirting. And one of the things I love about Ravnican conversation is that it is that kind of high fantasy. Everyone has that curt way of saying everything super silver tonguely, right? Everything's super smooth. And they're kind of just exchanging this back and forth, and Tajic's eyes sparkle and Teysa blushes slightly. It's like, oh, you two get a rip, and then they have a rip.
Yeah,
you know?
It's interesting. It also shows a lot of relationship between the guilds, right? Because
absolutely,
a lot of their bonding between Tajic and Teysa comes from their dislike of the Azorius. Weirdly enough,
right.
Not the
different interactions with the law, right? Yeah.
So from a Boros perspective, the Azorius are all too stuffy and they're bureaucrats, whereas the Boros, take charge and they don't have time for bullshit. They just want to like kick the door down and catch the bad guy and solve the mystery. And then the Orzhov obviously think that the Azorius are like just too stale, and the way that they use the law is just completely bland and bleh, whereas what they want to use the law for is to gain these advantages and to like be like a mental gymnastics thing. So whenever either one of them takes the piss out of the way the Azorius does things, or the fact that law magic is horrible, or all the kind of structures in Ravnica are actually a little bit silly and they should be doing different things with them, there's that kind of mutual respect which you really wouldn't expect from the military and the lawyers, right?
Yeah.
Which is essentially what the two factions are,
Well, this is the thing that makes interactions like this really important, is because it's not just a conversation between two random people that have been made up, right? It's also the way that magic story can instruct how the colours interact with each other. Because both of these are white guilds, right? All three of them are white guilds, one with blue, one with red, one with black. And it's almost like how the different aspects of being white are changed by the other colours kind of affecting them, and clearly at their core they will have similarities and things that they can see eye to eye in, and that's what I think is really interesting, because you see a lot of through individual point of views, you see how the opinions of different guilds react to each other, like what they consider to be too harsh or what they consider to be outside of their normal like acceptability, like, and that's what's really interesting, because yes, on a single side it's one person talking to one person, but this is the only way we really get to see the guilds interact between each other outside of the cards. So I think it's really important, because it does, as I say, highlight the things that they have, that they hold as like their values that are different, and the things that they're willing to accept and compromise when interacting with each other. Which throughout this whole bit of Ravnica, this trying to get the guilds to work as one, which is Raoul Zarik's kind of whole point, right? The guild summit, making sure they all act as one to help against the Bolis threat, and the inherent difficulties of matching 10 different idealisms. I think it's really interesting on a, as I said, an idealistic point of view. And then we also see it in the fact of how they react to each other's magic, right? And that's really interesting as well, because again, the metaphysics of law magic is something we don't really, it's, you get, the more we get to see of it, the more interesting it becomes. Like the way that Kaya took over the guild, all of the guild contracts and all the debt and everything, and that kind of being able to emotionally interpret how mana and magic works, like the flavor of magic, is really important for like people like us that want to immerse ourselves in the world and understand how the world would work in reality, right? Like law mage feels weird is such a great sentence. Like wincing, going, oh, law mage feels weird. What do you mean? What does it? Law magic feels weird. Like, what does magic feel like? And what do you mean it feels weird? And the fact, like, starchy, lukewarm, like a family dinner you couldn't get out of. And you can imagine that, and that feeling. It's just so clever the way that they can kind of, as a macro micro, the way that the guilds and magic in general works across Ravnica in these individual like comments between guilds of champions. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like the law magic is something that is heavily involved in this story, and indeed a lot of stories that involve the Orzhov, because the idea that the Orzhov being at the same time the primary religious body on Ravnica, and also the primary banking body on Ravnica, and also the primary organized crime unit in Ravnica, these three things tied together just makes for such a nuanced and kind of recognizable trope-wise, like mobster and like gangster films, like we all know those kinds of things are, but all of these things together make them such a huge presence. And it's sad to say, but I think it's true, there are certain guilds that get a lot more time in the sun in stories than others, and I think the Orzhov are one of those guilds that people keep coming back to because there's just so much you can do with them. And they are, at most times, the antagonists of the guilds in general. Like, even the people like the Golgari and the Dimir, they are maybe not liked universally, like within Ravnica, but I think for the most part, they kind of play their roles and they do their thing. Whereas the Orzhov, everyone knows the Orzhov are like this oppressive, iron-fisted regime. And it doesn't matter whether you're part of their congregation as a worshipper, doesn't matter if you use them as banking, doesn't matter if you do shady dealings with them. You just know that the Orzhov are like shits. So it's it's kind of funny that they're always kind of part of these stories. And yeah.
But I guess between like Tomic and Teysa, they've done a good job of like rectifying them in the eyes of the reader, right? Like the Obzedat don't read very well as being characters you can empathize or sympathize with, and I think that's what's kind of makes it interesting, right? I wouldn't mind seeing like a story that was, say, somewhere between like the Gruul, the Selesnya, and the Simic, and the way the difference between how they treat nature, which is weird that they will focus on something like law, which might be considered more boring, but it might be more easy to explore from a like a nuanced point of view. And I've always really found it interesting, like how the Azorius and as you mentioned with the Jace, whatever he says turns true, right?
Yeah,
those kinds of things. It's really interesting because we have law systems in place where in our lives, and it would be really interesting to see because it's almost dystopian, right? Like it feels a little bit like if you lived in an Azorius,
it's totalitarian for sure.
Yeah, like it reminds me of like 1984. There was a little bit where in Teysa Karlov's story, she's talking, she's reading an excerpt from Tihana Yarrick, who's a female revolutionary who wrote a lot of things that weren't okay, like that spoke out against the Obzedat. So even possession of her books is illegal, which is very, very 1984. And when you think about those kinds of ways and those little pockets of Ravnica, you could imagine it feeling quite, like totalitarian dystopia, not feeling like the nice green belt, or the Selesnya conclaves. Maybe it's easier to focus on the more modern and more realistic sides of magic for Ravnica because we can parallel it to our own life a little bit more.
But I think that is what makes Ravnica though, as opposed to other planes. I think this is why it's one of those ones that's so popular, because, and indeed why this trope for Ravnica, this kind of magical lore aspect of it all, is so readable and identifiable, because that is a very Ravnican thing. There are obviously like tribes and laws and customs and things which they make for every plane of the multiverse, but because this one seems so unique and there's this kind of blending between bureaucracy and fantasy, which is it'd be boring. Like if you said that on paper, if you said, I'm going to make a new fantasy world, and the crux of this fantasy world is that there's a lot of paperwork involved, and in fact, there's a whole faction of people where, like, if you like the blue-white faction, that's going to be like the pencil pushers of the guild. It sounds boring on paper, but it really works because they've done great efforts to make it really interesting. So I think it is interesting that they've had this, and it makes it the most sort of, it's such a big deal on Ravnica. But I think that's because they go in so hard on it, and it's fun to see how a more modern sensibility plane, even though it's still high fantasy, setting of Ravnica. It's not literally modern day, but because the ideas are kind of modern, it is quite cool to see. And yet, having a living Guildpact, having one person who can literally make or break laws just by saying it, is a bit of a nightmare, and it's why it doesn't work. Like, we do technically in modern day Ravnica have Niv Mizzet is the living Guildpact now, but he is far more connected to all the guilds at once than Jace, who, the reason he was such a terrible Guildpact wasn't because he was a bad person, but because he was, even though Ravnica was his adopted home, his inherent status as Planeswalker means that he needs to leave the plane all the time. Like, he can't be around to speak to the people, to know what's best, to keep tabs on people like Teysa Karlov, who are literally bullshitting him. He's a fucking mind mage.
Oh, this is the thing, right?
Like,
this is the thing that's really dangerous. Because I write this down as well, saying if Jace can be so easily distracted, flustered about putting like grappling hooks or whatever into his bag, which is a great image in my mind anyway, of imagining it's almost like Alfred talking to Bruce Wayne, being like, you've got all these like charity functions to go to. No time, Alfred. I've got to go and swing from buildings.
It's exactly that. Yeah.
And it's beautiful but then it does then create this precedence, right? That fuck, now Niv Mizzet's the guilds, the Guildpact, and I don't know if and for those that have seen, there's been a leak of the comic where he's suddenly this big Mizium metal dragon, which I believe isn't considered to be canon.
So it's the Boom comics. It wasn't a leak. It was a preview of the new Boom line of comics where he's got like a cyborg body.
Yeah, which immediately made me feel like, oh god, what's he gonna do? And my immediate thought was, wait, metal's really good for compilation, right? But I don't think that's. But the thing for me is like, okay, right. So Trace was distracted. I mean, he was a bureaucrat in ways, right? That's the way his mind worked. I mean, he wasn't an advocate or anything like that, but he definitely could work his way around understanding. But if he can be as easily bamboozled, like what will Niv be able to do with? I mean, he's probably got some degree of like he's not got the normal human grievances, right? Like he's a dragon, but dragon grievances are going to be like a lot worse, right? If he just decides to do this or do that with. I mean, again, we don't know the full confines of what the Guildpact can and can't do, but they make it very clear here that you could just bamboozle the Guildpact into making a law just on a whim, which is really funny. I loved that almost. It almost felt like a heist, right? And that was the bit that, like, when George Clooney and Brad Pitt go in and they manage to like sweet talk and get the person to give the information without realizing that kind of thing that I thought was quite clever.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a thing about characters like Jace, and which I don't think this isn't to try and diss the character, because we've gotten in trouble in the past for dissing some of these characters like offhandedly. This isn't a flippant comment. This is just a thing about Jace, I think, where he's clearly incredibly intelligent. And he loves systems, and he loves diving into information, and that's what pushes him to kind of go to new planes. Because
he solved the maze, right?
Yeah, he solved the maze. So he's obviously incredibly smart, but he's book smart. He's not street smart. And whereas Teysa is book smart because she literally wrote the fucking book on how to rule Ravnica, but she lives in Ravnica, and I think to be Ravnican, you need to understand how everyone's minds work. Like, everyone's on the grift. And I think although Jace has lived on Ravnica for quite some time, I think that's something you have to be born and raised with. Whereas he took his first planeswalk to Ravnica, and I still don't think he's quite as savvy as the average, Orzhov.
Well, that's a good point, right? He's definitely more Ravnican than Verinian at this point.
For sure.
So I guess now he's got his memories back, it's hard to tell, right? Like, I mean, he might consider.
Well, this was before then. This was before that. So,
yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, that's kind of what's going on in this story. Let's talk a little bit about Teysa's plan, what she wants to do, and her kind of motivations. So Teysa Karlov, even though she is the mouthpiece of the Orzhov, she's still a puppet, essentially, of the Obzedat. So for those of you that don't quite know, the Obzedat are the ruling ghost council of the Orzhov at this point in time, and indeed for the longest time before the events of War of the Spark, they were the guild masters. They are a group and they're a collective, but I think Karlov as in Grandfather Karlov, who's Teysa's grandfather. He was kind of seen as the leader of the Obzedat, even though they don't technically have leaders. Basically, they're old money. Everything, the whole church and the whole banking system revolve around these people. And essentially, they're old Orzhov aristocrats who are now living in undeath, and they're hoarding all of their wealth, and they're pulling all the strings, even as ghosts. So obviously, this is a big problem, because especially if you are part of the Orzhov like elite, like Teysa is, there's only so high you can go before you can't go any higher. And Teysa's not like a young Orzhov person. She's like 110
12,
or something.
yeah,
She's
112.
112.
Yeah.
So even though she gets called sweet girl and child by Karlov, which I absolutely love, it's not like she's like fresh out the gate. So there's definitely ambition to Teysa.
Well, what did he say? What was the word he said? He said you're very small, and I thought that was like, that's brutal, because obviously she wears her accomplishments on her sleeve, and they do make her, as we've seen, even Tajic, a Boros Legionnaire, has massive not aspiration. What's the word when you
admiration?
Admiration, thank you, for her. So clearly her status is big, like she's large, but the way he belittles her is just such a typical uncly grandfathery thing to do.
So obviously Teysa wants some change, but I kind of feel it's interesting that the thing about Teysa is at least she believes that her ambition isn't just because she wants to attain power. She actually wants to change and reform the guild to be something more than basically just a money spinning machine. Because the way that she views the Obzedat is that she thinks, yes, they have power. Yes, they have grip, which would be something that she wants to have as well. But all they use it for is to hold on to the money they have, to
perpetuate
and to more of it. It's just the same cycle again and again, spinning money, gathering debts.
Yeah, and no engagement with the other guilds, no development. Yeah, as you say, stagnation.
What can you even do with that wealth if you're dead, kind of thing?
Well, this is the thing, right? Because the tombs, like their bodies are covered. She said the corpses are shriveled, but they're like burdened with the gaudy robes and jewelry, almost every aspect of jewelry they could have possibly owned in their lifetime. Like, what do you need it for at that point, you know?
So at least she believes that when she gets power of the guild, she's going to reform it to be a force of power that will be progressive, as opposed to just spinning the wheels of money, right? Now, this is obviously really interesting, because it's not just a Game of Thrones style power grab. She does want change. She wants to push forward. But I still get the feeling, and I see it through this story, and I see it through every story that I read of Teysa, that she is something of a champagne socialist. Like she's an Orzhov elite, and I don't think she can get away from that. She still has her Karlov name.
She's not mono white. She's black and white.
She's not mono white. She's black white. She still relies on the power of her position and the debt of the guild to kind of push forwards. And I don't think, this isn't to say that she's evil, but she's not necessarily good, and she's not necessarily an anti-hero. It's, for anyone who knows current UK politics, the leader of the Labour Party is Sir Keir Starmer, who, being part of the Labour Party, is on the lefter side of politics, although not like necessarily full-on Marxist, but the Labour are like the Socialist Party, or like the sort of centre-left party in the UK. But he is still Sir Keir Starmer. He still did his postgraduate at Oxford University, and there's a great picture of him when he was at his Oxford days handing out socialist leaflets, and it's like, yeah, great, you're a socialist as part of the 1% of the fucking country. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, yay, but no.
I guess right? So can you represent the people without being one of the people?
Well, this is politics. This is Western politics. Yeah, right.
Do you need the power to be able to help distribute it? Like, if it's difficult, right? Because I recently watched Mank, the film about Mankiewicz, Herman Mankiewicz, and it has the socialists, the big point of being like, are the rich getting richer, or other people going to get some power back? And it's obviously it's going to go throughout the whole history of time, but yeah, I mean, realistically, she's not going to not want to perpetuate her lifestyle. You know, the way that she's been doing it for 112 years. I mean, just because you like the spoils of, I'm not going to say of war, because I mean that's not really it, but even if you benefit from your position, should you not enjoy the benefit of your position, as long as that position is benefiting others as well, right? Like, compare her to say like Tomic, who is a mono white Orzovian advocist, right? So their ideals are slightly different. I mean, bless him, he's all in love and everything, so he's not quite black yet.
Well, I think throughout the story, so yeah, Tomic is like her kind of protege, so he's like her aide, and we don't see a lot of Tomic. He is around, but we don't see a lot of him until War of the Spark, and he is always seeming to kind of he's very white aligned, even though he is still part of the Orzhov, and as you say, like he's always trying to look for the sort of greater good in the situation, even if that does still mean he has to use his position within the Orzhov to kind of get it,
Yeah, well, because I think the point he came up with the plan to help kill off the Obzedat, and that was to work with Rao, because Rao would stage an attack on one of the churches, which would distract the guards, so Kaya could sneak in and kill the Obzedat without having to also deal with all the lackeys, right? And the agreement was that then Teysa, being the new guildmaster, who couldn't be seen to be involved, so she had to be stuck in her tower the entire time, couldn't be broken free beforehand, otherwise she'd look like she was involved with it. If they did all of this, it was to then agree as a guildmaster to go and attend the guild summit that Rao was trying to organise to try and unite, despite all of Nicobolas' plans to subvert everything, which is kind of interesting because Kaya was put in a position to kill the Obzedat through Nicobolas. And then obviously, shenanigans occur and everything like that. But it's interesting to see that she specifically even says that the Obzedat don't want to share, they don't want to create any connections, they don't want to have any outreach. And I think it's one of the more important things over that story arc is this idea of each guild losing that the thing that makes them separate from everyone else, and it's the way that they can join with everyone, right? I mean, as much as Dragon's Maze made everyone race against each other to see who could get there first and be the best, Jace kind of was able to be almost like separate from that, right? He wasn't really guild affiliated at any point. So I think it's an important point in Ravnica where everything's changing, that this is what you need, right? And I think this is why I think they made Kaya in the first place, because they realised that the Obzedat were a very difficult thing to get rid of, and they knew that was going to be one of the main things that they would need to get rid of to allow Ravnica to have this feeling of moving forwards, even if certain guild leaders like, say, Niv and Rakdos don't necessarily change much across all of the different sets. Obviously, Trostani is still basically there for all three sets. Otherwise, we see a lot of male guild masters, because there are only two female guild masters at the beginning of our Ravnican adventures back in the OG Ravnica, and we gain Lavinia, Vanifer, Vraska. Obviously, the Boros were always female with Razia, Feather, and Aurelia, but it's interesting to see there was this development from male-centric guilds to having this more female, inspired revolution, as it were.
Well, I kind of it's obviously just trying to like, art is a mirror up to society, isn't it? So
yes,
and
absolutely.
Teysa's story is literally about trying to kick out the old and bring in the new, and that kind of idea of there's lots of crusty old dudes who only want to keep things the status quo that they are.
Dead old men is literally the quote, right?
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
poignant.
So there is a lot of that kind of stuff. But I just think it's always interesting with Teysa that as much as she is something of a revolutionary within the context of her own guild, there's a line in the Teysa Karlov story by Adam Lee where it reads, "She wanted to gut the Orzhov Guild and reshape it into a new kind of power that Ravnica had never seen. We don't get told what kind of power that is, and I'm going to guess it ain't going to be a socialist utopia where like everyone is freed from their debts, because when in War of the Spark, Kaya wants to get rid of everyone's debts, Teysa explicitly tells her it's not a good idea." So, I just think it's funny, like Teysa, and this is why Teysa works and why I think she's an interesting character, because she's not a hero. She is still who she is, and yes, she might not be as cripplingly evil and horrible as the Obzedat, but she's still an Orzhov guildmaster. Do you know what I mean? Yeah,
she's not an idealist, right? Like,
no.
This is the thing, Kaya's young, so Kaya can kind of come in, and this is one of the things that was really interesting with that story, was the comparison between the two, and I guess it's kind of like arguing in modern day, like, oh, what if everyone forgave everyone's debts overnight? And it's like, that would cause a lot of economical problems, because a lot of people rely on debts to make things happen. Everyone relies on everyone owing each other a little bit of money, and that's something that maybe Teysa was correct in, that there are systems in place in Ravnica and have been for a long time, and they're not just systems like, systems, quote unquote, I guess we can do what we want. Like, no, like if you break this, like there's a magical thing that binds you to do it. Like you can't get around the laws. Well, obviously she can, and that's the whole point of her character, but these laws are like indoctrinated not only into the society, but physically impelling you and stopping you from being able to do certain things, which is another thing I thought was really interesting, this idea of how the hell did the Obzedat? Do we find? I can't remember. Do we find out how the Obzedat managed to get a little box room that wasn't affected? That was separate from.
No. It's in the story. Teysa kind of offers the idea that it might be older even than the Obzedat themselves.
Yeah.
So I think it's just one of these things. But then it's like any of these things. You wonder about, you watch like a mob film, or you kind of, even in our own world, in our own society, with the elite and the kind of ruling classes, you kind of think, they existed before the systems were there to put them in place, because they're the ones that wrote the systems.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I think
So there's a question of, do we keep doing it because we're doing it, or are we doing it because it's necessary and that's why it's done? And it's hard to, you can't just switch it on and off, right? Oh, let's just try it for a day. Socialism. You can't do that.
So it's an entrenched, and I think that's what makes the Obzedat so cool, and why I think eventually you had to get a character in who could literally have the power to physically stab ghosts, is because as characters, and as the whole point of this story, is that the Obzedat are so like entrenched,
exactly. Yeah,
you're not getting rid of them. It's one of the things I really love, and we'll talk about Karlov now, I think, because he's also in this story. Grandfather Karlov.
Creep motherfucker.
I fucking love the fact that this story ends with him winning, because not only is it like, oh yeah, switch up of narrative, you don't always have the heroes win, blah blah blah, which is obviously great, but that's fine, that's kind of taken as read. I just love the idea that Karlov is so smart, and he's so ahead of the game, and has such an iron grip on the Obzedat, on the Orzhov and the guild system, that even Teysa can't best him, and he'd already won. It's not like he kind of tricked her and then tripped her up and was like, oh,
it didn't matter what she did ever.
Didn't matter what she did. As soon as she was the Grand Envoy, she could stage 1,000 coups in the way with only herself, and it wouldn't matter. Because she gets to that room, there's no laws in that room. She can't physically take them on. She can't lure them out of a situation. They have access to her bank accounts, her living situation, her very identity as the guild master. Fucking hell. Like, it's brilliant.
It really cements home that feeling of. I'm going to use. I'm going to get a bit punny here, because as I titled, like, the first thing I wrote down was, why are the Obzedat even worried? Like, from their point of view, they're dead. No one could touch them. Yes, somehow they'll write in a character that can kill ghosts, but at the time there was nothing that could touch them. By the end of the story, we find out that it's not even that no one can touch them from like a physical killing them point of view, but they're outside the law, which is massive. And it's almost like this funny enough, they have almost an ethereal absolution, which I love, is because the card ethereal absolution is the moment that they killed and all of the spirits get absolved of their that kind of absolution.
Sure, yeah.
Right? Which I think is funny, because they are absolute in their hold, and it's funny that we see, as I say, they have to almost fabricate a character to be able to break out, because they created a system that was so strong that they needed the MacGuffin, right? Kaya's the MacGuffin. So yeah, it's really funny and interesting. I love, as you say, this balance between Teysa seemingly, and obviously she's the protagonist in the story, even if she isn't necessarily a black and white protagonist. Great, hilarious. But the fact that you have Karlov having this feeling, this overarching villain feeling of there's nothing you can do. And it makes it so gross, because you feel that as he comes in, he makes her kiss the ring, and he sits, the fact that he busts in without knocking on the door, like, that's every kid's a nightmare. Like, he does all of the things that you hate, and you're so sure that he's going to get his comeuppance. And even when they talk about the tombs, and the fact they have like jets and diamonds in the sunken hollows of their eyes, and there's like the decadence of their tomb is described in a lot of detail, and you build up this like, yes, please go and screw it, stick it to them, and then she doesn't get to. She gets locked up in a fucking tower. And yeah, it's really interesting to see, as you say, a 112-year-old crone, as it were, who for all intents and purposes looks about 30, gets schooled by someone who's centuries old and talked to you like she's like a little child. It's a really interesting dichotomy.
It's a really cool bit of arrested development, because obviously Teysa's 112, Karlov's centuries old, so relatively speaking, she is a petulant teenager. She is a child to her grandfather, and it's funny because it's not even like he's treating her like that and she's not, acting out whatever. She absolutely is acting out.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I wrote a note saying she's smart enough, right, to try and trick Karlov and to flatter him and to be like, well, no, of course I love being the Grand Envoy of the Obzedat, because she's still trying to kind of play the role until the time is right to strike. When he busts in on her, she's trying to kind of fob him off by saying, oh, well, no, of course I will do the jobs that you're giving me and all this kind of thing. But she's still too headstrong and still too tired of their shit that she's still bigs up her role as an advocate, which is seemingly separate from her guild role. Like, she's still like, well, no, but I have my own things as
she
well.
speaks out against him,
She
right?
speaks out against it, and you're like, no, you fucking idiot. Like, this is exactly what he wants. And it's exactly that thing with teenagers when they go, yeah, of course, yeah. And then as soon as you try and challenge them or anything, they're like, well, no, but I still want to do my own thing. And it's like, well, you've got to play the game a bit better here. Like, this is why Karlov is so good.
Yeah, it really comes in and says, oh, are you being vain, like looking through her own book? And the funny thing is, yeah, she was. And because she was being vain, thinking that, oh yeah, I wrote this up, look at how I can handle law. And then he basically, in the back of his going, he's like, bitch, I'm outside the law.
Yeah.
And then he doesn't rise to it, right? He subjugates her further. And then he even says, go and buy yourself something pretty.
Yeah, he gives her like some coin.
Fuck you, dude. It's so cringe in all the right relevant and like what's not relevant relatable ways, right? Like, it's such little humanistic qualities of day-to-day life that you put into a story like that, and it really resonates, like, the position. And yeah, I'm gonna have to reread the bit where Kaya kills them, because I'm pretty sure it's not as satisfying as I remember it to be.
I mean, because obviously there's so much going on in War of the Spark, isn't there? Because I've read those chapters, and they are satisfying because it is a moment of poignance. It's just not lingered on long enough, and I don't think that's an issue with the writing itself. No. I just think, there's other stories to be told.
Yeah,
they're kind of done with
it compared to a story like this, where you're really focusing on all of the intricacies of like the relationship as a family, and that's the thing, family values, right? That's the thing that makes this all so gross. Like, the one thing she doesn't want to be is a Karlov, even though it's the one thing that's kind of given her all of this power and responsibility and everything. Like, she wouldn't have been
the core of everything that she is.
Yeah, she wouldn't have been able to help in the initial arc had it not been for the fact that she became the Baroness of the Utvara reclamation area. Like, had she not been in a position to own that land, then she wouldn't have done all of the good. So it's almost one informs the other, right? And it'll be interesting to see how she is in isolation now when we eventually go back to Ravnica and kind of see her, because I think between her and Tom, well, she didn't take any responsibility for Guildpact from a legality point of view, right? I mean, she's going to be shadow.
Her position as of now is that Kaya is still the leader of the Guildmaster of the Orzhov, so that is still her role. Tomic is seeing the day-to-day running of the guild, so he's as Kaya's obviously off doing her planeswalker thing and figuring out all that for herself. Tomic is essentially making sure the guild is still functional, and then Teysa is in the background, essentially having taken the Obzedat role, because now she's putting the strings in the background. So she has gotten what she wants, because I don't think it's really ever stated that she wants to become the guild master itself, because she is effectively the guild master when she's the grand envoy. She's still making she's still vocalizing, she's still the face of the guild. But now she's actually in the Obzedat position of being like, okay, Kaya doesn't want anything to do with the Orzhov, but she's literally bound to it because she's magically the guild master. Tomic can run the guild because he's clearly got like his heart in the right place. People trust him. I'm going to be behind the scenes now. So she is in a position now where she has what she has. But this is it. Yeah. She's become the thing she hated. And she was always going to do that.
I guess all of those debts, everything that they had, though, they were... So it's not got the same... It's almost like, yes, okay, she's taken the same role, but all of the deals and all of the bargains and all the blackmailing has almost been like wiped clean, right?
Like, for a lot of them. Well, there's... so Kaya has in Modern Ravnica, Kaya's forgiven the debts of a massive section of the Obzedat. The Orzhov, because she thought it was ridiculous that there was this many debts, and it was taking a physical toll on her as well, because as the guild master you physically feel all these debts, which is why it probably helps to be a ghost, because you have no empathy and you have no physical body for it to really affect, so there you are. That's why the Obzedat were functionally very solid. So she forgave a bunch of debts for a bunch of reasons, but then she raised the taxes of people living in the Orzhov district from 10% to 40%, and there was a bunch of riots, and then she had to bring them back down again. So immediately she fucked the system.
Okay. That's the thing. That's what I'd be interested to see when we go back. I mean, obviously there's a lot of, you've just got to assume behind the scenes this all works out in an economy point of view, right? Otherwise the suspension of disbelief is kind of completely ruined. But yeah, I think that's what she wants, right? She wants to have the influence without having the burden, right?
But this is it. This is why I think Teysa is such a fun character, because it's tragic that she's trapped intrinsically to a system that she clearly wants to change. But also it's really fun just to know that she is a Karlov. She's inherently a Karlov, and as much as it binds her, it's also the thing that she is. So when she does become this Obzedat figure after literally trying to take control so many times, saying, "No, I want to be different," and she's just not.
Odds on she'll become a spirit at some point in the future.
I would love that.
Yeah,
I think that's card should be a spirit card.
I think somehow, like, I mean, I don't know how old they're supposed to live to, like the average human, but at 112 doesn't make her sound old, and she doesn't look aged. So I'm not sure.
I think the Obzedat, I think the Orzhov, specifically as a guild, have magics which prolong life.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I'm just wondering because I don't want necessarily her to die off, but I could imagine them. I could see at a point that she does essentially become, Teysa Karlov, and it's almost the same, framed the same fashion, the same chair, all that kind of thing as Uncle
Karlov of the Ghost Council.
Yeah. I've also got in my mind, now that I've remembered that Kai is technically obliged to be the guild leader, I've got this image in my mind of where someone comes into like an Orzhov bank to ask to speak to the manager, and the cashier like just looks off. It's like, so where's your manager right now? And it cuts off, and it changes to like metal music in the background. Kai had two swords in Voron collects his hide. You're like, bang, and you're like, she's away. Can I take a message? Oh, fantastic. I mean, these planeswalkers, this is why you don't get involved in politics, guys. At least Ral sticks around, Vraska too. This is what I really like Ran and Vraska, to be fair, because they hold their tie to their plane a lot more. Like, what does Kai give a shit about being the guildmaster of the Orzhov, right? She even says at the beginning of chapter 2 of the Gathering Storm. It's like, what do you know about the Orzhov? She goes, nothing. And she like even laughs about it, and it's always like, okay, you're going to take, and knowing in your mind that by the end of the story she's then taken over as guildmaster, you're like, oh girl, you got some shit ahead of you. But yeah, no, she's a very and black and white characters always are, right? I mean, either you make them kind of edgy, edgelord like Sorin, who I think is low-key everyone's like secretly most hated character in Magic, seemingly. Or you make them like Teysa, right, where you can understand the reasoning behind it, especially when you do an episode like this, where you can see her real-world day-to-day way of, okay, yeah, it's privileged. I mean, everyone likes watching the 90210, right? Yes, okay, it's privileged people having normal people problems, but that's really engaging. And it does show, like, the whole law magic side of things. It does really delve into it in a way that makes it feel tangible and understandable and intriguing. So... I mean, it's no secret that I think that black white is personally my most interesting color combination, and the characters therein are just the best. And like Teysa's great. Like, I'm kind of happy. I mean, I don't know, because I do love Karlov and the Obzedat and their whole shtick, but I'm kind of happy that narratively, now that they're out of the picture, we get to see Teysa kind of changing gears, because she deserves it. And it's why these little individual stories are great, and why I wanted to do this podcast, this particular sort of set of episodes for this podcast. Because you're right, with things like War of the Spark, there's too much going on. You can't focus on things, and some things maybe aren't as satisfying as they should be. So when you do have these like little individual stories, these kind of slice of life things, it's why we always bang on about the Nikki Drayden stories for Ravnica Allegiance and Guilds of Ravnica, is because she was able to cut out the white noise of everything else going on and just focus in on individual guild life. The world building, right?
Yeah, and in fact, in those stories, the Orzhov story in that run was about a family kind of challenging their own ideas and their conceptions of the Orzhov. And
yeah, it was a debt collector, wasn't it?
It was a debt collector. It was about the debt collector who did feature in a couple of other stories and was himself a dick. It was his family, and I think it was the daughter. His daughter, I think, who was looking to join other guilds. Like, she wasn't set on being part of the Orzhov, and about how does that factor into it and all this kind of thing. There's a line. Sorry, I've seen in my notes. There's a line that I really love, and again, this is this idea of Teysa maybe like showing her true colors a bit, and maybe not being as much of the black sheep of the family as she thinks she is. They go into the lower tombs of the Obzedat, and they're about to go through a door which only a member of the council or part of their bloodline can go through, and so she cuts her hand and wipes her blood on the door discreetly down by the bottom, and Tajic looks at her as if to say, "Fuck are you doing?" And she turns around to him and goes, "Well, it's an expensive door."
Yeah, right.
Like, oh, fuck you.
And it goes like specific efforts to detail how it's not even been made nicely. It's almost like there's no symmetry or anything. There's forced as many gems as they could into it, but she still can't help but
she still can't help it. Like, she doesn't know the value of money, but she understands that expensive things are good.
Definitely suffer from dragon sickness, right? That addiction to treasure, where it slowly like twists
Yeah.
your mind. I mean, except they even say at the beginning, right, that someone the Obzedat dictated that someone had to serve 500 years or something, and she said a little unreasonable, and it's like, oh, I mean, it's just a little unreasonable, not completely abhorrent. All right, okay, Teysa.
I mean, well, no, but that's it. This is why I love her character. She's like, it's at both times tragic and intrinsic to her character that she is Teysa Karlov, and she can rattle her chains because she wants to have a bit more power, and she thinks that, you know, the Obzedat are obsolete, but she's always going to be a Karlov, and she's going to fucking love it. And, you know, I just think it's just great. It's just this great little slice of life, you know.
Yeah, I think the Guildless, are the only people really, and they're like a late addition. I don't necessarily think the Guildless was something they realised needed to be expanded on too much, because they did that with like the Kaladesh kind of storyline. But it kind of, the thing about Ravnica that's really good is they do a lot of focusing on the goods and the negatives of each. If you think about it in terms of like, what are the positives and what are the benefits and what positives and negatives, there we go, Jesus Christ. What are the positives and negatives of missing those other three colours, or only being those two colours? Like, what does it make you strong at? What does it make you weak at? And how does that influence each other? Yeah, and I think it's nice to see an episode where there's not like a hell of a lot of action going on, but we still see a lot of the inner workings of how the plane's working day-to-day life. It even talks about how people busying themselves around and no one busies themselves around the Obzedat, district, because it's like lots of ghosts. There's no stalls or anything, right? There's no commerce, and it paints a really kind of bleak grey, obviously grey because it's black and white combined, but you know, like the Orzhov area feels really intense. Like it feels like that noir feeling we got during Ravnica Allegiance before we even went there.
So I noticed that too, and I thought that was really interesting because you're right, in the Orzhov district, even though there's structures around that aren't necessarily Orzhov, like you have the Boros jail, and I can imagine there's like a couple of other things going around, because the districts in Ravnica, like the kind of the way the system is set up from what we've seen, is that yes, there are individual districts, but the guilds all still live, they all still share the same plane, so it's not like they're little countries. So they do still cross over. But yeah, in and around all the Orzhov district where the basilica is and the churches and the Vizkopa, which is the big sort of cathedral, the main sort of cathedral.
Yeah, that's the one I couldn't think of.
Yeah, Vizkopa. Yeah, because it doesn't. Yeah, Vizkopa doesn't sound right compared to the other ones. But anyway, it is Vizkopa. Is that the reason there aren't any traders? From my perspective, the reason that there aren't any traders and no merchants is because there is no middleman. Like the church wants your money, so they will give you blessings, and they will, like, you know, open a fucking bank loan for you or whatever it is you want to do with them, because you know it's a religion and a bank simultaneously, which is a great sort of like little dig at sort of modern religion, really. Although it's a little bit heavy-handed, I think. But you know, it's good for fantasy.
I think it's better to be heavy-handed than be subtle, right?
Yeah, otherwise too subtle, at least.
It's trying to speak too directly.
Sure, but it's just a really cool thing that there's. Why would they bother extorting the merchants around the building when they literally can just hold out their hands and go, "Give us your money." Come into the church, give us your money.
The right to work there must be really expensive. Like, you know, how you busk in certain places, right? Exactly, it'd be so expensive.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, no, I think it's also like another little point about the idea of them having to work together is all it took was, Jace had to stumble over, and say yes to a law that otherwise wouldn't have been. But all it took was a tiny bit of cooperation between the Boros and the Orzhov to get directly to the Obzedat's chambers.
To get that far, yeah.
You know what I mean? I think it's really interesting. And that's almost like this pig-headedness of, yes, he still had the ultimate trump card, and maybe that's why he didn't mind too much. But it doesn't take much with a little cooperation to really undermine and undercut the way that the systems work. And I think we were still at a point of Ravnica then where being part of a guild meant you were part of your own guild. You didn't socialize with other people. That's why they were the guildless, right? Because everyone was so totalitarian. You couldn't just be a little bit this and a little bit that. It was like, well, I don't want to have to choose specifically that or specifically this. I want to be separate. I want to be able to choose. And we do go a lot, and there's a lot of that in the War of the Spark with Rat. A lot of not knowing which of the three guilds she really wants to be a part of, which is really interesting. But yeah, all it takes is a tiny little bit of cooperation, right? And it's funny. Again, the Obzedat got the last laugh. So, it was such a good little twist and turn. Like as stories go, again, like the heist, right? It was the last twist still worked out. Like Thanos still snapped his finger. Like it was very, very well done for a little contained story. I think a lot.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
A lot of back and forth.
All right, there's one last little bit I want to talk to you about. Does a sword make a good cane? Yes or no?
No, I guess not.
No, it fucking doesn't.
Does the simp does the little look, because Tajic is a bit of a simp here. I think it was flirting, right? He offered his sword. He could tell she was struggling with walking. He had nothing else to offer her, so he offered her his sword. I think that's really cute and sweet.
I mean, right, okay, so for people who haven't read the story fully or don't remember this little bit, Teysa as a character has a lame leg, so she uses a cane. So when she walks, she needs a cane. To get her to the Boros jail, I mean, firstly, this bit, why did she not just have her cane, like, on her, or, like, have Tajic carrying it as if he took it off her when he arrested her?
Maybe because they didn't want. It's very obvious if everyone knows Teysa has a cane.
Any
so
walking
maybe...
stick. Any walking stick.
Yeah, I know.
So, all right, okay. So he takes her to the jail, so she doesn't have a cane with her. So when they're about to walk down the big passageway, he offers her his sword to use as a cane, or rather, she asks him if he has anything she can use as a cane, and he offers her the sword, which is like I can imagine is exactly what she was intending for him to do anyway. But blah 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 blah. All I'm saying is, I mean, firstly, in the two artworks which we have for Tajic for his two legendary creature cards in different sets, they're different swords. They're both fucking huge.
They're both huge, yeah.
They're both stupid shapes as well, so they're not.
This is his Tuesday sword in the story. It's just his Tuesday sword, you know. It's not one of the big ones. It's not his weekend sword. Those are weekend swords.
I'm not at all suggesting that Teysa can't like handle a heavy object, but Tajic is described as being quite a large guy. He would have to be, being a Boros Legionnaire. So if it's big compared to him, it's going to be about as tall as she is. So his big fucking heavy sword that she's now using to prop herself up on. Okay, fine. Maybe she's used to using it. But have you ever tried to lean on something that has a point?
Right, on stone as well.
On
like,
stone!
Fuck off. Yeah, no, it's not going to work.
I just couldn't. I'm sorry. Like, out of everything in the story, I just thought that was unbelievable, and it took me out of the immersion.
See, that's the thing. I went for the simp avenue. I just went for the fact that he was simping on it, and that's why I was like, that makes it fine. That actually makes it fine. I mean, again, I'm a big shipper of their relationship. I think it's really cute, and it's always really fun to see colloquial language used in Ravnica, even if it is sometimes a little bit too on the nose. You know?
Yeah, I don't know. I think Alison Luhrs, who I don't know if we said. Oh my god, I'll have to do this in the pre-record. I don't think I've said that she's the author of this. Alison Luhrs is the author of this, and Alison is a fantastic writer for Magic. Obviously, the kind of architect of the Ixalan storyline as well, and I think is not egregious with using colloquialisms when writing stories as much as other writers have been, because as I'm sure everyone listening to this knows, it's one of my bugbears. But yeah, so I don't know if I love the colloquialism, but I do love the fact that in Ravnica, compared to other planes, Ravnica can afford to be a little bit more metropolitan. Yeah.
I think she keeps that high feeling, because I think one of the nice things, this is kind of a little bit of a segue, but I thought was really interesting was there's a moment that Teysa remarks on Tajic and saying the elocutionists in the Boros Academy probably frowned on the assurance in his voice, and I'm like, oh, that's really cool, because then you start thinking about the Boros Academy and all the different. They have elocution lessons in the Boros Legion, like that kind of. Those are the kind of little things that I think are really cool, and I think the way these two talk is of a higher class. You don't get as much common tongue as we'll call it. Plus, I think they were both trying to put it on a little bit. It does feel like they're both trying a bit hard to be super have good elocution when they're talking to each other.
They're both the champions of their guild.
Yeah, right. And there's a reverence between the two of them, whereas I think they also both want to. I mean, there's always a point of you want to come across well, right, when you meet someone that you admire. So I think that was very apparent, and that subtlety is quite nice. I mean, again, the characterization in the story is really, really good. The nuance and the way that people say things is it says a lot.
Yeah, I loved this story. I love Teysa as a character. I hope we get to see an evolution of her moving forwards. And I was really happy. I'm happy we have these little stories in between the Gatecrash books and the War of the Spark books for these characters specifically, because all in all, she's a very pivotal character. Obviously, I personally love the Orzhov, and it's my favorite guild. It's my favorite color pair. These are my favorite characters in those color pairs as well. So yeah, I've always loved Family Values as a little self-contained story, and just rereading it with the eye to knowing that we were going to talk about it today, and now that War of the Spark has come out, which this is the first time I've read it since War of the Spark has come out, it's a really cool little puzzle piece that you can still look at on its own right. So yeah.
Very cool. I did like it. I'd say it has a lot more, and again, this is what I love about slice of life parts of Ravnica, is you actually get to learn a lot more about the world than, say, the action pieces, and that's really important for myself. I know it'll be important for you as well, Andy, and I know it's important for a lot of people to feel that immersion. Just sometimes a little throwaway line actually matters a lot in filling in a big piece of the puzzle in your brain. And some things, like talking about law magic, makes me question everything about how magic works for the next 2 days. So good job, magic.
Good job. Cool. I think that's a good place to leave off. I don't want to, we can just keep going round and talking about other stories and this, that, and the other, but I think we've reached maybe the saturation point for this one. So yeah, guys, if you're listening and you liked our little discussion, as kind of meandering and broad as it was on this little story, do let us know. Also, if you want to give us individual specific stories that you would want to hear us chat about, then please let us know as well. As I said, there's no rules for these book club episodes. They can be stories that are in the middle of an arc, at the beginning, at the end, stand alone. Preferably, we want to keep to the web fiction stories.
Yeah, we're not going to do books from the Thran time.
No, and also it's an accessibility
yes,
issue
it's
as
very
well.
difficult to get hold of these things.
Yeah, and we want people so when I sent tweets out this week saying that this is the story that we were going to talk about, and I want people to be able to click on that link, see the story, or have it open in front of them when we're talking about it as we go, because they're not particularly long. So yeah, if you do want to chat about it, then hit us up, and yeah, let us know. I've enjoyed this. I think it's nice. I'm into not talking about set releases every
absolutely
fucking day.
Besides, just do retrospectives as well. As I say, there's a lot of stuff that's come out over the last few years, and now we're doing single block formats. There'll be more and more things coming out in years going forward. So it's nice to be able to go look back when we had a whole year to look at a block, just stay on the same plane for a little bit. God, those were the fucking days.
Well, interesting. Having just said I'm happy we're not doing set releases, and having you just said we're still doing one set blocks, the information for the Innistrad sets at the end of the year has just been released, and it looks like we're getting 2 full sets for Innistrad.
That's really interesting. Yeah, there's going to be a lot to talk about that, because
I assumed there was going to be 2 half ones.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Time.
Yeah, it's very, and there's a lot of little questions and stuff. You might still, you're probably going to get your Werewolf Commander, buddy.
Yeah. So it's going to be Werewolves are going to be released in September. So it's oh my lord, Moonlight Hunt. Yes, and then in November, the Crimson Vow, which is the vampire set. Yeah. So yeah, we will probably swing back around to talking about some more relevant stuff, I suppose, next week, or at least in the next couple of weeks, because Strixhaven
will
is
start
just on the horizon. So yes, we will be talking about that, because obviously we've avoided talking about it too much until it actually became relevant in terms of card releases. Again, let us know if you want us to do more book club episodes. I mean, we're going to do them regardless, so whatever. Yeah, it's our podcast.
But yeah, if you've got suggestions and stuff, then let us know.
Yeah, exactly.
There's lots of really cool arcs out there, and it's hard to know what people did and didn't go to. We might not do Battle for Zendikar, but that's just my personal preference.
Also, yeah, I want to be able to enjoy the web fiction.
Yeah, right. I don't have to gouge my eyes out. It's like when I read the entirety of War of the Spark as a catch up in one morning, and I think I went a little bit mad.
So there we go. But yeah, if you want to send those suggestions, guys, there are a couple of ways you can do it. mtflavouring@gmail.com is where our emails go. So if you want to email us, if you're not on social media, do it that way. We do have people email us as well. Email still does exist as a platform to communicate with people. And we always love reading those emails, so please keep sending them in. mtflavouring @mtflavouring, Twitter, our Twitter account, which is linked in the description box. And apparently I can't fucking say
ever.
For the first 40 episodes.
I'll try it next week for you, okay? We'll see. For
40 episodes, I was fine. And then in the past 20 or so, it's just whatever. You can find us on there. You know where we are.
It's
in the description box below. If you can't find it, it's even hyperlinked now. I've even started putting in the actual link. Hyperlinked. Do you remember that as a term in IT?
Yeah, I know, don't, because it just reminds me of having to write fucking references for essays.
Yeah.
Hyperlink. Yeah.
It's cool. There. Good, my personal Twitter is @AndyManface. Nathan's, yours is
@the Fox in the Moon.
Excellent. Do you have anything final to say?
Fucking hell, let's go. That's enough.
Oh, I love it. I love Teysa Karlov. She's great.
She bang.
Thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.